A very warm welcome on a sunny day to the Made in China podcast. We are sitting in Damian's office once again. We have the wonderful view of the Oriental Pearl Tower in Shanghai, and we are very happy to have Jason Thomas as a guest here with us. Jason, very warm welcome to our podcast.
Fabulous. Thank you, Damian. Thank you, Thomas, for having me over. It's a great pleasure to be here, back in China. From the last time I've been here, I've kind of left China in 22 after the whole COVID episode. But it's so great to see here, great to connect, and great to be part of China in many ways.
And now you live in one of the other upcoming areas in Middle East, not in Europe, not in the US. Where do you live now?
I live in a wonderful sunshine city called Dubai. I believe it's the center of the world in many ways because I have the pleasure of actually working with people from different parts of the world in that one city.
Fantastic. Yeah, also very warm welcome from me again, Jason. Happy to have you here. We will start with 3 very short questions before we dive into our podcast.
Super.
We discussed this a little bit already. Property. Yeah? What does your dream home or dream property look like?
Wow, that's a fabulous question. I think, property in essence is, I would say, in a place like Dubai, on the Palm Jebel Ali, which is going to come about in another 2 to 3 years from now, which I think is a great place to be, where they're going to be even better than the first Palm in Palm Jumeirah. And I think it's going to be something amazing that the world has not yet seen, with 80 hotels and as a lifestyle. And yeah, I think it's going to be something amazing what they've never done before. And Dubai traditionally, it has a concept of you build and the world will come.
That's crazy. Next podcast episode we will make at the Palm.
Yeah, well, hey, you're most welcome to come over. I'd love to kind of host you guys there.
Thank you. Yeah, quick question number 2. If you would have one superpower, what would it be?
Wow, I think the superpower would be to see the future. Then I can use some of that to the present.
Very good one, very good one. Let's meet up more often once you can see it.
Yeah.
Can share some of how it looks like. What does a perfect day off look like for you?
A perfect day off will be, hanging out with family during the day, a bit of sport at the gym or the trainer, or a little bit of paddle sport if I can. And then in the afternoon will be a chill with some beach club in Dubai or any other parts of the world. And an evening would be a nice dinner or supper with friends or a barbecue as such. So that's what I call a nice calm day.
That sounds amazing. So much for the small talk. Let's talk about business, because you're a businessman through and through, right? Because you want to see in the future and use your knowledge to invest, to make some good money. But first, I would be interested in, if you had to introduce yourself in a few sentences, how would it be? Like, who is Jason Thomas?
Oh, fabulous. I would introduce myself as a global citizen in that sense, who have the experience, have the liberty to be actually working with almost 70% of the global population in terms of market, from Middle East, Africa, Asia in a broader context. And I have the pleasure of also working in one of the most progressive countries in terms of consumer, retail, e-com, which is, I believe, is China. Now I have progressed to kind of push myself to be in a lifelong dream to be an entrepreneur. So that's what I would say in terms of how I see myself. And I can also say small tidbits. I love to dance. I love music. So that's I believe I'm a very colorful person in nature.
Fantastic. So, well, you have had and you are having still a very exciting career, right? You mentioned it, from Middle East to China, from Tetra Pak to Adidas, and now to being an entrepreneur. Could you walk us a little bit through that journey, and how did that all change come about?
Sure. If you purely look at my, I've had the pleasure and experience that I managed to work with some great talents and leaders across my journey. If I look at Tetra Pak, a predominant domain of my experience has been in the finance function. And it's a kind of a good thing that I guess when you're in the finance function, you get to know pretty much across the organization how things tick, right from the top line to the bottom line, to drive margins, to drive a balance sheet. So, so you get a good view and handle of the business. So Tetra Pak was a more B2B driven model, and that you learn a lot about B2B for your customers, how to build credibility and driving NPS with them. But at the same time, I think once that journey got finished and I learned as much and I kind of progressed, and I always want to be part of a consumer company. And I'm absolutely proud that I had a fabulous journey with Adidas, starting in finance in the Middle East and Africa region, then spanning across to a broader region across into Asia, then eventually to head the whole of APAC as a region as a CFO, then move across to become an MD for Adidas in this region for China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. So once I finished all of that, that's the professional corporate, kind of a roadmap. And the progression that I always wanted is to become an entrepreneur. And I personally see that all what I've learned over the past is what I'm now using in terms of skill sets, relationships that I have built. And that's what I'm leveraging right now in what I'm doing.
A very interesting and super cool story. And now you said it yourself, you are an expert in consumer preferences, and we have seen a huge shift all over the world in consumer preferences, and also very obviously in China. So what, from your point of view, what did change in consumer preferences in the last 5 years?
Yeah, I think, if I compare to the last 5 years, or when you started the period, a lot of from a brand point of consumer preferences, we talked about the world becoming a lot more digital. The preferences became fairly, I call it a bestseller or a product or a consumer need in the US, becomes the same thing in Europe, or for that matter in China. That still exists as a norm, but what we see over the last, I would say 4 to 5 years, more and more prevalent now is the fact that the need to engage with consumers locally. So, that's a narrative that I would also call out during my times in Adidas. And I see many other corporations in this region who are successful, even in today's times, is by adopting and understanding the local consumer needs. So it's sometimes not everything is one size fits all in terms of application, be it product or be it marketing that works. One needs to understand the consumer habits and adapt, be it the communication, be it probably also having a certain amount of product assortment and proposition specific to the consumers in this region. And I take China as an example. And you have to understand, I think for global companies to win in a place like China, for example, and I'm sure in other economies as well, and specifically take China as a great marketplace, because gone are the days where Chinese consumers would buy a global brand just because it's a global brand. Today, the Chinese brands are ever fast in dynamics, bringing products from thought process to execution into the shop floor or the marketplace. And that's why I believe it's a big call out to many of our global brands to be more faster, more nimble in terms of how they think. And there's some learnings from this market that they need to adopt in order to win. And if they don't, I'm afraid you will see the fact that in increasing times, local brands in various sectors are leading in businesses. So yeah,
absolutely. Well, that's very interesting what you say, because the latter has happened quite often now, at least in the last 5 years, right? With my company here, we are representing many international brands in China. We sell them online on Tmall, Douyin, whatsoever, and we always look at the sheets and the data and tell them, hey guys, watch out, the Chinese competitors are strong, right?
Yeah.
And they're coming since 2019. And they have continued to be very strong. If you look at Anta, if you look at what they've done also with Arc'teryx, right, or Fila, domestically owned foreign brands, right, how they operated here. It's really fascinating to see how fast they grow. So have global brands like, for example, Adidas, Nike, whatsoever, have they recognized this change early on also in their headquarter? And if so, what strategic adjustments have you seen them make in order to stay relevant and competitive?
I think, a lot more brands have been adaptive. See, the reality is, if you're a CEO of many of these global corporations sitting, when you're addressing a certain consumer to create new products or an assortment that is different to a consumer, those are also, probably going away from the norm of efficiency sometimes. But, there is a bill to pay on that, but that's a conscious effort that they need to take. They need to embrace those changes are required in the regular KPIs to be successful in markets like in China as such. So, it's a mindset. You have to embrace it. China has a separate ecosystem on the digital landscape, so you need to understand those uniquities needs to be aware. But sometimes in many global brands and global CEOs, they're not aware. Sometimes they are ignorant of the landscape in the marketplace. So my biggest call out would be to understand, embrace, and potentially even push it a little bit further. That you need to have Asian representation in boards to be able to have a voice on the table of boards and so on and so forth, to educate and to potentially evolve strategies to win in a much more global landscape.
Damian already mentioned the Chinese brands, the very successful Chinese brands. We have sports brands, we have cosmetics, car brands. From your point of view, what are they doing right to be much more successful or to become much more successful in the last decades? And also they are not necessarily cheaper than foreign brands, for example.
Right, that's right. I mean, if I purely look, and again, it could vary, it might not be an answer that's reflective across all types of businesses or as such, but what I see uniquely is the fact that they are adopting consumer understanding. They are doing a lot more local for local or China for China in that sense, faster. They are early adopters of new technology. I think the innovation angle in all elements, and if I take the car, I'm just taking a small example in any ways, and no pun intended to any of the other markets who also produce cars as such or brands. When I look at Chinese cars and the innovation that they have in EV, and mind you, I've seen that already in 4 or 5 years earlier. But if you purely look at it, it is not just the performance, it is the comfort, and it is also a lot of the other elements of consumers can see the difference, be it voice activated on different elements, and the ability to being in a car on the journey to be comfortable, to have devices and TVs, whatever, right? So I think the consumer journey inside the car is also as important as just the outside of the car. So I think just to give you a small example, so that's where I see you see the fact that it's value for money. In some cases they could be expensive, but we're willing to pay for the expensive because it goes a additional range. So that same approach goes for the sports industry, same thing applies for cosmetics and so on and so forth. So I think that's something that one needs to embrace, that these sort of fast change in go-to-market is something that that is uniquely different, I believe, in Chinese. And hey, I must admit, I had the privilege of working with Chinese colleagues. Again, they're very productive, very loyal, very hardworking. And I think throughput and output is also an example of that also leads to better able to achieve economies of scale.
Jörg Wuttke, the former president of the European Chamber of Commerce, he also always described the Chinese market as a fitness center for the world, right? Because this market is as competitive as it gets. So how do you now manage to stay competitive? You mentioned one factor, maybe you should have a Chinese in your global board of directors, right? Yeah. As obviously the CEO spends probably most of the time at the headquarters, traveling to other countries only, well, occasionally or with high frequency. But yeah, how do you really stay competitive in this market as an international brand?
That's a it's a very tough decision for many global boards to take. But I personally believe that's the only way that you'll be relevant and faster adoption in a global brand with some of these technologies and innovations that's happening in China. I can tell you even just my personal experience after being in China for 5 years, between 2017 till 2022. When I go even to the Middle East, I see the fact that some of the innovations on tech or consumer apps that is here is not there. And I see, my gosh, if somebody were to adopt those earlier, it would be such a benefit for the wider world and financially also benefit as well. I think CEOs, and I call out for people at a global brand to actually embrace and maybe put that as a mandate. End of the day, guess what? If you purely look at pure world economics, if you purely look at the disposable income and the number of middle class population that's coming between in Asia, with large economies, with India, China, and many others in Africa also developing, I think, and in the Middle East, there is an eminent need that we need to not just look at a Western view, but also an Eastern view as well.
You already mentioned the localization as part of the successful strategy. What does it mean for you? Is it like the localization of a team or the localization of the products to Chinese customers, like other shoes than Dubai customers, or is it a localization of the marketing strategy?
You're right. I think localization is a broader context, right? So I think it could varies across different things. So it starts, let's just say, if you're a product-led company, it starts with the product attributes. And I give you a small example of what we did also whilst my time in China, and also my predecessor in the market is also adopting similar and if not better strategies as well, where you take elements that is Chinese culture oriented, or it could be specific talents or that is prevalent from a consumers in the marketplace. We use some of those elements, like take for example as simple as the Chinese New Year. We embrace culturally the Chinese New Year, and we make product assortments that are relevant to the Chinese New Year, right? And that is specifically during that span of period. But it's uniquely, I know one of the quick learnings I would say is a Chinese New Year product could be used across the globe. There are Chinese consumers across the globe, but surprisingly many global brands don't even use that. So I think that's a quick learning there. But again, besides the product, it's the storytelling, how the consumers and why. That's when you touch the emotions and the intellectual, I would say, affinity towards a brand from a consumer standpoint. That also shows that as a global brand, you acknowledge, you value the consumer's point of view or perspectives on their local culture. And if I look at even today as well, the Chinese consumers as an example, they're very proud of their culture. They're proud of their nation. So I think to embrace and showcase stories, they will also, and that also goes in the workforce to have, and the workforce, I personally believe, having a diverse, also having global colleagues also in the market like in China and embrace and bring them back into China is also essential, because you want to make sure your global company still represents a global culture, values. That's also very crucial, because sometimes I fear that, again, companies are going the other way around, where in a tough times, let's just go fully localized, because that could also be dangerous. I think you need that conduit between a global and a local to be successful.
Yeah, very much so. Totally agree to that point. And now locally, we see that apps like TikTok now also play a very big role in the Western world. Right, it's all over Europe, all over America, and every country that we can think of. To what extent can actually the learnings from China can be used as a blueprint to what is to come in the other countries of the world? And how can companies that act here and that are already playing on TikTok maybe since 5 years and also selling on TikTok do this as learnings for the European and American markets? Do you see that happening? Or do you think there's still a Chinese wall between those companies, the headquarter, their Chinese subsidiary, and they're not interchanging and they're not learning from each other?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, sometimes the issue comes in is the tech stack is completely different. So the tech stack becomes a difficulty issue because you have to create that specifically, uniquely for China with that same tech stack doesn't work. But I certainly do believe in today's great minds, the idea is to, the substance over form. What does that product entail, the functionality? And that functionality could be adopted in another environment, another part of the planet. I think there is a lot of them. And I actually, if you really look at the story, if I look at it from a global context, I see, I think TikTok is a great example. And soon TikTok commerce will also be there in a global context as well. But I see a lot of similar apps and technologies which is in China can also go beyond China. I think that's also an opportunity, and again, it could be them by themselves or joint venture and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think global organizations again, and sometimes you see, it's a bit of a difficult edge to walk through because it's an understanding issue. Where they're not fully clear about what some of these apps in China does. So the adoption is not sometimes 100%, I would say, welcome. So I think that's something, again, I go back to ignorance. I think, that's where we need to have a stronger voice on the table that they understand, they comprehend, they value it, then they adopt it, which also means investments needs to be kept aside as a company, be it a capex or an opex, to make these evolutions to be market leaders. And if you don't do that, there will be Chinese companies going into those countries and taking a lion's share of your business very quickly. So I think, my message would be to find ways to embrace, learn, rather than putting up those walls.
You already said it. You left the corporate world and started your own business. What problems does your company solve?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of businesses that I've actually gone into simply because, and some of those businesses were coming out of the past experiences. Some were completely new, and I also wanted to challenge myself into new territories that I've never done. So I think it's also a learning curve. So the first one was actually a furniture brand that I bought because I like products, and bought off a person who was actually in Dubai, was actually leaving Dubai, and I thought that was something fun to do, and it was got to do with more Balinese. I enjoy that kind of a product and proposition, and I see a big opportunity also with outdoor in the market as such. So that was one. And then, we set up a short-term rental business in the marketplace because there was a lot of people investing in a place like Dubai, and there was a need to take care of their asset base as such. And then complementing that, we also set up a brokerage as well for people to buy properties and so on and so forth in Dubai. But I would say the biggest business that I have now focusing over the last 18 odd months we've been me and another ex-colleague of mine who's working with me in Adidas in the past. We've kind of built this company together to scale it in an extent that we're helping global brands manage some of the excess inventory in globally so it's not just any specific market, but also from a globally, and helping them to make sure the fact that we protect core markets of these individual global brands so that they're able to not over discount in those specific markets, rather build a more full price sell-through business. And I see the evolution of that would be to potentially build an e-com platform going into many of the emerging markets such as Africa and in Asia to potentially give that opportunity for consumers directly.
Perfect. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that means that this excess inventory issue must have been quite present, right, during your time working for the other companies. How big of an issue is it, and what are the different aspects of this excess inventory problem?
Yeah, and I think, typically if you're a brand, if you're doing retailing, excess inventory is something that sometimes you can plan it, you can manage it. Sometimes you can't plan it due to factors that you don't control, due to economic conditions in a certain market. All of a sudden, what you bought 8 months ago, a year ago, or 6 months ago for an upcoming season or a period, the sell-through doesn't come out. So one needs to take care of that. And there are venues that some companies have to clear that inventory up until the next new product launches come in. But sometimes you see the problem is the demand supply curve in that market is varied. Some, even by dropping the price, the demand and the supply curve comes to the alignment, and then you evaporate that inventory over a span of time. Sometimes, despite that, it doesn't. And if you over discount in that certain market a product or an assortment, then the brand value takes a bigger hit, which takes even more marketing dollars to build that back up. So you're walking a tough line in that sense, and that could vary in various brands as such. So I think that's where this problem is prevalent in all markets. And the irony is, some products work better than the other. Some product life cycles changes faster than the others, demand supply curves. And sometimes it's purely because of a competition comes out even better and faster that the brand has not anticipated. Hence, you also have sometimes an oversupply. So these are all factors that lead to, but again, as a brand, if you over discount anything too much, guess what? Then the brand value takes a hit. And here, we do know that to maintain market share, you have to sometimes in certain channels. That's normal, but excessive of that would be detrimental to the brand. And that's where we come to global brands to help them, simply because we know what a marketplace management is and how to manage those implications.
And before we started the recording, we already found some common ground in the sense that we said we are not the kind of persons to just sit on the beach and do nothing, just drinking tequila and just enjoying the sun. We always have the urge to do something, right? So for the last question, I would be interested in what are exciting projects coming up for you, and where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
Oh, in the next 5 years, I certainly do believe that I will be sipping on a few more tequilas and by the beach, to be honest with you. But yeah, I think, there are certain ventures that I'm passionate about. As I said, I think one of the elements that I see is also, I see certain economies, especially on emerging economies, that to work with platforms to help clean up some of this excess, or potentially even physical retail in some of these economies where a lot of the brands are not present. Also, in a very sustainable way, whereas clearing a lot of these products excessively in Western world, this also gives an opportunity for many consumers in the world who don't have access to the product in an accessible price point that they can get to wear or try some of their products. So that's one. But yeah, I think, there's this, it's funny when you are doing entrepreneurialism, then you see many other new ventures that comes in that kind of excites you as well. So one of the things that I'm kind of doing a bit of a due diligence is actually on the lab diamond space, which I believe when I look at brands that exist on the jewelry space, and it's more prevalent coming out of the Western world. There's not many globally from the east side of the world. So that's something that, without giving any further details, but something that I'm working on. That might see something of that in the coming months or year or so, but it's something fun that I like to do what I enjoy, and that some of that is product, and some of that to make sure the consumers can enjoy some of that creation, and make a yield out of it.
Perfect. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jason, for spending time with us here in Shanghai. It was a great podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Damien. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for having me over, and let's enjoy this beautiful day in Shanghai.
See you in Dubai.
See you in Dubai, guys.